The path that popular music took all started at a church festival in South Liverpool. At the age of 15, Paul McCartney received an invitation from his schoolmate, Ivan Vaughan, to attend the ceremony at St. Peter's Church in Woolton on July 6, 1957. Paul was invited to the festival by Ivan, who believed he may be interested in listening to the skiffle band The Quarrymen, which was formed by John Lennon and consisted of pals from Quarrybank High School. As the band's leader, John, who was 16 years old, had Colin Hanton on drums, Rod Davis on banjo, Pete Shotton on washboard, Eric Griffiths on guitar, and Len Gary on tea-chest bass. They grabbed a couple beers after the show, and Ivan introduced Paul to the band. The fact that he could tune and play guitar with his left hand astounded everyone. As an added bonus, John was elated to hear that Paul could sing 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran word for word. He obviously needed to become a member of the band. With regard to this, Chris Ingham stated in his book, The Rough Guide to the Beatles, that John was aware that this talented youngster, who could also play a bit of piano and, when the Saints come marching in on trumpet, was an obvious threat to his leadership, but he was also convinced McCartney could strengthen the group. After seeing John exclaim, "Paul's so good," Eric Griffiths became Paul's biggest fan and supporter. The team will benefit greatly from his presence. Joining us, he is essential. Just 2 weeks after that, while out for a bike ride, Pete Shotton unexpectedly ran across Paul McCartney and, as everyone had planned, offered McCartney to join the Quarrymen. Paul consented. By 1959, John's schoolmates had departed the band, and Paul's buddy, George Harrison, had joined a year later. The band changed their name a couple of times until Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best joined in 1960. Sutcliffe departed in 1961 and died in 1962. In the same year, the Beatles were officially formed. Afterwards, their manager Alan Williams secured a residency for them in Hamburg, marking a transition from skiffle to rock and roll. Their performances in Hamburg and the Cavern Club catapulted the band to Liverpool fame, where they were managed by Brian Epstein. The Beatles' rise to fame began when Brian managed the replacement of Pete with Ringo Starr as drummer. With From Me to You, they achieved their first official UK #1 by 1963. Their arrival in the US was explosive a year later, and they quickly rose to the status of global superstars. Far had John and Paul progressed since their rendezvous at Woolton. Throughout the 1960s, the Beatles were able to reimagine popular music thanks in large part to their songwriting cooperation. Their first songwriting sessions took place at Paul's boyhood home on Allerton's Forthland Road. The two began to create songs separately as they got older, and when creative disagreements within the Beatles surfaced, they would send them to them other for final adjustments. In 1972, Wilfred Mellers wrote, "Opposite poles generate electricity. Between John and Paul, the sparks flew." This article was about John and Paul. The poetic elegance of Paul moderated John's raging iconoclasm, while the resiliency of John hardened Paul's wide-eyed charisma.